The bank lobby buzzed with the usual midday clamor as people shuffled in and out, seeking to complete their transactions before the lunch rush. And amidst this organized chaos stood Sergeant Major Thomas Ashton, a 78-year-old retired military logistics expert whose life had been marked by discipline, precision, and decades of unwavering service, from the humid rice fields of Vietnam to the scorching deserts of Iraq. A man who had orchestrated supply lines through chaos and bloodshed. And today, he stood at the counter of the Consolidated Trust Bank, his usual bank of nearly 50 years, with a document in his hands that was far more than just a piece of paper. It was a testament to the years he had spent battling the invisible bureaucracy of the Department of Veterans Affairs. A long overdue compensation check for disability sustained during a classified operation, and one that would finally allow him to repair his leaking roof and visit his distant grandchildren, luxuries his modest pension could never afford. So, dressed in neatly pressed khakis and a clean-collared shirt, his veteran ID and license tucked alongside the check in his coat pocket, Thomas patiently waited his turn in line until he was called to the window of a young teller named Jessica, whose name tag boasted of her customer service specialization, and though she wore a smile, it was the kind that seemed etched on by corporate training rather than genuine warmth. And when Thomas courteously presented the Treasury check along, with his deposit slip and ID, Jessica's demeanor subtly shifted, her eyes narrowing as she examined the check, holding it up to the light, scanning it under ultraviolet, and typing its details into her terminal with increasing concern. Then she frowned, her voice taking on a tone both cautious and accusatory as she questioned the authenticity of the check, citing its unusual paper texture and routing number format. But Thomas, ever composed, calmly explained its legitimacy, stating it was issued directly by the U.S. Treasury as retroactive compensation through the Department of Veterans Affairs. But Jessica, unmoved, insisted that the document triggered multiple red flags according to the bank's internal verification protocols, and despite Thomas presenting matching identification and calmly reiterating the check's origin, Jessica took a step that stunned both the veteran and the surrounding customers. Without managerial approval, without further verification, she turned and fed the Treasury-issued check into an industrial-grade shredder behind her counter, reducing years of Thomas's bureaucratic struggle and financial hope into confetti in seconds. And for a moment, the world around Thomas went silent as he stared in disbelief at the shredded remains of a promise, of dignity, of service recognized. And when he finally found his voice, he asked her with quiet fury if she realized she had just destroyed a legitimate United States Treasury instrument. But Jessica, with bureaucratic coldness, shrugged and said it was bank policy to destroy potentially fraudulent documents on site to prevent misuse elsewhere, and if he had a problem, he could speak to the branch manager, who would only tell him the same thing. But Thomas, who had seen nations fall and friends die, who had held steady under gunfire, who had learned to spot bureaucratic nonsense masked as protocol, knew better than to waste time arguing with a low-level employee blindly following flawed rules. So, with a calm resolve sharpened by decades of service, he stepped out of the bank into the golden sunlight and sat on a nearby bench, pulling from his coat an old cell phone whose contacts had not changed in years, and with steady fingers, he dialed a number given to him long ago by a 3-star general he'd once advised in the field, a direct emergency line to the upper echelons of the Treasury Department, a number only meant for when the system failed catastrophically, and when the call was answered on the first ring by a professional-sounding aide, Thomas identified himself by name and rank and requested immediate contact with Undersecretary John Harrison, invoking his authorization code, and in moments, the voice of Harrison, once a young officer under Thomas's mentorship and now a top-ranking official, came through the line, furious not at Thomas, but at the institutional failure that had just occurred, and as Thomas recounted the entire incident, the destroyed check, the dismissive teller, the unyielding adherence to a misapplied policy, Harrison grew silent, then coldly angry, promising swift and public action, telling Thomas to remain where he was, and within minutes, as promised, 2 black sedans with discreet government plates pulled up to the bank, and out stepped federal agents from the office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Inspector General of the Treasury, who entered the bank without sirens but with a presence that silenced the room, flashing gold badges that made the bank. Security guards step aside, pale-faced, and inside, as Jessica was attempting to justify her actions to branch manager Henderson, both found themselves suddenly flanked by Special Agent Davis and Special Agent Marcus, who informed them that an unannounced emergency audit was being initiated on their branch due to the unauthorized destruction of a federal instrument. And Jessica, visibly shaken, was escorted to a private room where, under questioning, she confessed that she had not followed full bank protocol, had skipped managerial escalation, and had acted purely on gut feeling and personal suspicion, while manager Henderson stammered apologies and vague reassurances about retraining staff. Even as an executive from corporate headquarters, pale and sweating, arrived in haste, having received frantic calls from above, and outside, Thomas sat watching it all unfold, his aged face unreadable, until his phone rang again with Harrison on the line, confirming that his replacement funds were being wired directly to his account, that all fees would be waived, and that the teller was being suspended with termination likely, while the branch itself faced serious federal scrutiny. And though Thomas was deeply moved by the swift action, Harrison insisted it was the least they could do for a man who had served his country with distinction. And as the call ended, Thomas remained seated for a long time, watching the bank, the people, the reactions, until eventually Jessica was escorted out by the agents, pale and defeated, while Henderson and the corporate exec stood meekly before Agent Davis. And in that moment, the balance of power was clear, for the veteran, who had once been dismissed as just another old man, had summoned the weight of justice not with fury, but with precision, proving that real authority moves silently. And when you shred the dignity of a veteran, you may very well shred your own credibility in the eyes of those who defend what honor truly means. And this entire story stands as a testament to how swift federal oversight and justice can still work when the right channels are engaged with calm, lawful precision, especially when the issue involves a United States veteran wronged not by enemy fire, but by institutional arrogance masked as policy. And it reminds every citizen and every corporate employee that the benefits earned in blood and service are not just pieces of paper, but sacred contracts with the nation. And shredding those contracts is not just an error, it is a desecration.